Hopefully you read in Chapter 1 about the major perspectives in contemporary psychology. I'm going to sum these up in 5 words or less. Biological, it's all about the brain. Psychodynamic, Freud's thing about the subconscious. Behavioral is changes in behavior through conditioning. Humanistic is growing into a better person. Positive psychology instead studies psychology's good parts. Cognitive is a study of mental processes. And cross-cultural, apparently there are other cultures out there. And evolutionary psych is development over evolutionary time. Now, one thing I think your book doesn't make entirely clear is that these perspectives are not mutually exclusive. In fact, the more psych perspectives you can bring to bear in explaining a psychological phenomenon, the better we would say you understand that psychological phenomenon. And of course, phenomenon just means thing. So what I would like to do is I would like to talk to you about a thing in psychology, a psychological phenomenon, and then do my best to explain it using as many of these perspectives as I can possibly muster. All right, so what phenomenon to look at? How about this? This is something called the trolley dilemma. If you've had any philosophy classes or maybe other psychology classes, you may be familiar with this already. This is what we call a moral dilemma. In this situation, there's a trolley that is out of control on the trolley tracks. And if nothing else happens, that trolley is out of control, is going to run over these 5 people who are laying on the tracks. However, there's a person standing next to a lever. And if he pulls that lever, the trolley instead will fork and go down the left fork of the trolley tracks. And instead of killing those 5 people, it's just going to kill that one guy. So the question that we would ask participants in a study like this is it morally acceptable for the man to pull the lever? Like, is it good for him to pull the lever? Is it okay for him to pull the lever? 80% of participants say yes, it is okay. But if we change the situation only slightly and ask the question in a slightly different way, we get a different set of answers. In this scenario, the trolley is still out of control. And it's still running down the tracks. And if nothing else happens, it will still run over these 5 people. However, now there are 2 men standing on a footbridge. One of them is a portly gentleman. And if the other guy pushes that fat man off the bridge, that fat guy is going to fall to his death. But his girth is such that it will stop the trolley before it gets to those 5 people. So the question is it morally acceptable to push that man off the bridge? Over 90% of participants say no, it's not okay to murder that guy. And that's a little bit confusing to philosophers or mathematicians who both see these 2 scenarios as the same scenario. In both cases, you're sacrificing 1 life to save 5 lives. From a purely math perspective, the questions are equal. From a philosophical perspective, they're both equal, either a utilitarian approach of saving the most lives or a deontological approach of not using another person. But in either scenario, you sacrifice 1 to save 5 or not. But I think, as fledgling psychologists, we can see that there are some fundamental differences between these 2 scenarios. Let's see if I can run down what some of those differences might be by using our contemporary perspectives in psychology. Where to start? Let's start with some of the difficult ones. Psychodynamic you can't really do. It's a little bit tough, right? We're looking at subconscious factors from childhood that might influence this decision making. I guess maybe if you had a fat uncle who hugged you too much as a kid, that's why you want to shove him off a bridge. I don't know. That one's hard to apply. Others, humanistic and positive psychology, are a little bit tough to apply as well. We could say that one of your basic needs to help people might motivate you in pulling the lever, but a more advanced, but an even lower level need of not being a murderer, of following the law and not killing people, might hinder you from doing that and from pushing the guy off the bridge. So that one's a little bit tough as well. Behavioral we can do fairly easily. If we look at the number of times you interact with machines, like levers in your life, you are generally rewarded. Whether it's pulling a lever on a slot machine or punching the buttons on a vending machine, when you interact with machines, you generally get rewarded for doing so. However, when shoving people, you are generally punished. Starting in preschool and going all the way through to the end of your days, if you shove someone, someone generally gets upset about it. So it's far more likely for someone to pull a lever than to push a person. Let's see, what else can we do? So from the cognitive perspective, it's relatively easy. Cognitive psychology is measuring those internal mental processes, which is difficult to measure, but what we can do is we can measure the reaction time, how long it takes someone to respond to these moral dilemmas. And that's a good indication of how much thought they put into that response. So in the moral, impersonal choice of pulling the lever, the people who say yes make that decision very fast, while the people who say no take longer. The reverse is true in the moral, personal decision of pushing the guy off the bridge. The people who say no, don't push him, make that decision very quickly. And the people who say yes, shove that guy off the bridge, take a very long time to make that decision. So that suggests to us that more thought has to go into not pulling the lever and to pushing the guy off the bridge. Well, that fits very nicely with what we can examine from the biological perspective. What we can do is we can put a person into a functional MRI and we can watch their brain activate as they are thinking about the answers to these questions. And we can see what parts of the brain activate in response to these moral dilemma. So in the moral, impersonal choice of pulling the lever, what we see light up is the frontal lobe. That frontal lobe is responsible for math, logical decisions. It is a very logical decision to pull that lever. When we ask the moral, personal version of the question, whether or not you want to shove the guy off the bridge, we see a different part of the brain light up, the limbic system. The limbic system is responsible for emotions and emotional decision making. So that is a very emotional choice to not push the guy off the bridge. And the really interesting part is when we look at the people who said, no, don't pull the lever, and we look at the people who say, yes, push that guy off the bridge, we see both part of the brains light up. We see both their limbic system and their frontal lobe light up, and then a third portion of the brain gets recruited, a bit called the anterior cingulate, which is involved in cognitive conflict. So when one part of your brain says, do this, another part of your brain says that, they go to a third guy, the anterior cingulate, and that makes the final decision on what you're going to do. So really good understanding at that point when we see how different these questions are from both the cognitive and biological perspectives. Now, interestingly enough, we can look at this cross-culturally. All we have to do is ask the same moral dilemma to people in other cultures. For example, in China, everyone pushes that guy off the bridge. They respond almost the same to the pushing the guy off the bridge as they do to pulling the lever. Cross-cultural psychologists suggest that this is because in China they have a collectivist culture. That is to say, from a very early age, they are taught to do what is best for the group. And so they very easily make the decision to sacrifice one to save more. From an evolutionary perspective, it is interesting as well. Evolutionary psychologists will say that our moral decision-making portions of our brain developed with us over evolutionary time. And so in our early evolutionary history, when we are, groups of primates living in caves, coming down from the trees, etc., everyone you care about is near you. Moral decisions are made by proximity. The people in your group of early humans are the people you care about not murdering. People further away you care less about. And evolutionary psychologists will suggest that that has been perpetuated down through the ages to today. So we care about the person that we have to actually put our hands on, while we don't care about the person laying on the track down the way, because he's far away from us. Look, maybe that's a little bit hard for you to get from that example, but another example from evolutionary psych about the same phenomenon is thus. If you were walking down the street and you saw a baby in a shallow mud puddle who was face down and going to drown if you don't save them, and you don't stop to pick up that baby because you just bought new $200 shoes and you don't want to ruin them in the mud, we would call you a monster, and we would be right to do so. However, if you buy $200 shoes instead of buying, say, $20 shoes and sending $180 to an international aid fund, which is going to save dozens of babies' lives in the third world, we say to you, those are really cool shoes. Because we don't care about those babies that are very far away, while we do care about that baby that was right next to you. So evolutionary psych says morality is based on proximity. And clearly, we're not limited to that perspective. Lots of people do send money to international aid organizations. Lots of people do help people who are struck by disasters around the world. But we are far more likely to care about victims of the Joplin or Bridgeton tornadoes than we are to care about victims of a tsunami or a Haitian earthquake. Because those people are far from us, the other ones are near. And I think that having that sort of awareness and the overall awareness from all of these perspectives helps us better understand our own moral decision making and perhaps overcome some of the limitations that we might otherwise have. So hopefully that exercise helped you understand how to apply the contemporary perspectives and understanding psychological phenomenon. And throughout the semester, you will be able to bring one or more of them to bear in explaining things that we study. Thanks.